Hey everybody. In last night's live stream, I talked about what the definition of a stunted fish was, and at the moment I'm not going to get into that, but we will talk about that later in this video. During that live stream, however, I mentioned that several people had mentioned that my discus looked stunted, and I disagreed with them. I did not think they looked stunted at all. Now, when I was saying that, I was basing that on no real metric other than me simply looking at them and just sort of judging with my eye whether I thought they looked disproportionate. I thought their eyes were too big or their bodies were too small or something like that, and to me they looked fine. And so I was adamant that they simply are not stunted. And it was made known to me last night for the very first time that there actually is a metric you can use. You can actually measure the eyeball. There's a way you can draw a line directly through the center of the eye, and then you measure the size of the eye and how many times you could place the eye on that line. And so now that I knew there was an actual metric, it wasn't simply a matter of opinion, it was something we could measure, look at, and determine either it is or it isn't. And so I went upstairs and I had two good pictures of discus. I had one of the blue diamonds. I don't know which one it was, but it was one of the larger ones. And then I had one of the smaller red turquoise. I don't think it was the smallest one. It's kind of the runt of the tank, but it was one of the smaller red turquoise. So the blue discus, I was surprised to see, had just a little shy of 5 eyes. So meaning 5 eyes could fit in that line along its body length. So it almost met the standard of 5 to 6 eyes, but it did still fall short. It was below 5 eyes on the larger one. So once I knew what I was actually looking at and knew what I was looking for, when I looked at the photo of the red turquoise, I could just see right away that this is definitely not going to be 5 eyes, and it wasn't. It was 4 eyes exactly. So the red turquoise definitely has big eyes by that metric. So the people that noticed that just simply from watching my videos and seeing the fish swimming around were correct. They did pick up on the fact that that eye is disproportionately large compared to the fish, based on that metric and based on that metric alone. No other measurement would determine these fish to be stunted or whatever other than using that eyeball chart measurement. So when I determined that, I became alarmed. I thought, well, I'm clearly doing something wrong. What am I doing wrong? I'm not, there's just so many things I'm not doing that are traditionally done in the discus keeping hobby that my mind began racing of like, what am I doing wrong to make these fish not healthy? Because to me, stunted simply means unhealthy. They're not developing properly. In the discus community, I've come to find out that stunted simply means they're not growing to their absolute maximum potential. By that definition, most everything in the world is stunted. I'm certainly stunted. I smoked cigarettes when I was a teenager. If that didn't stunt my growth, I don't know what did. So again, if you want to use that very, very loose metric of it's not growing to its maximum potential size, then yes, my discus are stunted. They are going to be stunted. I've said since day one that I was going to deliberately stunt them. I don't want them to be maximum size full-grown discus. I want them to be about 6 inches, maybe 7 inches, but I've got 10 of them in a 125-gallon tank, and therefore I don't want them to be full-grown. But at this point, when I saw that the eyes were too big and all that, again, I thought I was doing something wrong, and I thought my discus were unwell or being mistreated. And so I started looking into this, and I started looking into what does this eye chart mean? What does it mean when there's 4 eyes instead of 5? And what I came to find out was this eye chart was created basically by Jack Watley. It was created a very long time ago, and it's basically his opinion of what he thinks is about right for how big the eyes should be on a fish that you are trying to max out its size. Again, I'm not sure where this comes from or why this is a thing in the discus community, but apparently the goal of every discus keeper is to make their discus as big as they can possibly get it. That's it. That's why you buy a discus. That's why they keep them in the bare bottom tanks. That's why they keep them in the warm water. All the things that are done in these weird ways that are like specific to discus are all sort of geared around making sure they get as big as they can possibly get for some reason. And so with all of the focus on that aspect of the hobby is just maxing out their size, then people seem to put a lot of weight into this eyeball scale thing. And so that was Jack Watley's scale that he came up with years ago, and there are a lot of people out there that are actually starting to argue that maybe we need to move away from the Watley scale because he's not the only breeder in the world, and lots of other breeders have come out with different strains over the years, and they're different than they used to be 30 years ago, and maybe some, I've even seen some as many as saying having as 9 eyes in that line could still be within the range of normal for that specific strain of fish. So relying solely on this Watley eyeball scale from who knows how many decades ago that this guy from the fish that he was breeding decided was the right number of eyes and so on and so forth. So that's basically what the Watley scale is. And once I realized that, I was like, all right, that's not really as relevant as I thought. It doesn't necessarily mean my fish are unwell. So I kept reading, I kept doing some research, and I did find a good article. If I can find it again, I'm sure I can find it in my history or whatever. I'll put a link down below to it. It actually went on to explain a few of these things. It explained what the Watley scale was and how that meant, but it also immediately went on to say, now if your discus doesn't have the proper number of eyes in this line, that doesn't mean they're not healthy. It just means that they're not going to grow to their maximum potential, which again, we know mine are not going to. I don't want them to. I'm not trying to get them to go to their maximum potential. So that's all it means. It doesn't mean they're not healthy. It doesn't mean they're getting a lack of nutrition or they're under stressful conditions or anything like that. It just means they're not going to be as big as they can possibly be. I don't want them roid raging at Gold's Gym. My goal is not to just max them out. I'm one of those weird people that just wants to actually have them like as fish. I just want to have them in my tank. I just want to feed them and treat them like fish, and they're going to grow up to be as big as they're going to be. And if that's 5.5 inches, then it's 5.5 inches. I've never set out a goal on any fish I've ever purchased that my goal is to get this fish as big as I can possibly get it. I want them to grow up nice and healthy. I give them a nice, good, wide variety of diet. If it's a fish that I know is going to get a little bit larger, I tend to feed them a little more when they're younger so that they have the opportunity to get sizable. But it's never been my goal to max out any of my fish. So why discus would be a different type of scenario, I don't know. I don't know. But that's not my goal. And so when I started looking into the things that can stunt your discus's growth, I was surprised to see 2 of the things that were on top of the list were putting small fish into a large tank because they feel more secure in a smaller environment and they'll be less stressed, and so they'll grow faster, and then as they grow you can move them into larger tanks. So I put these right in a 125-gallon tank, and so apparently that's a way to stunt their growth. And I put them in a heavily planted tank, and apparently if they've got plants and stuff to swim in and out of and around and substrate to interact with and stuff like that, that will somehow hinder their maximum growth potential. Again, doesn't mean they're not healthy. It just means you're not going to have incredible Hulk-sized fish, which I don't want. So again, just the way I'm raising them by default is going to stunt them. I'm also not feeding them as much food as I can possibly feed them. I'm more concerned about getting them constipated by overfeeding them than I am worried about maxing out their size. So I do feed them a few times a day, but I don't feed them a lot. I feed them enough to stay healthy. And that's it. I just want them to be healthy and just grow up. I'm going to love them no matter what they grow up to be, The other thing I'm doing is I'm keeping the temperature under 80 degrees. I'm not keeping it in the upper 80s. I'm keeping it at 79 and a half, somewhere around in there, for the sake of my Tenopoma over there. That's plenty warm enough for these fish to be healthy, but it's not going to max out their growth. And so that's just not my goal. I just don't care about maxing out my growth. So again, all of these concerns, every time I have people making me think that, I'm doing something wrong, the more I look into it, the more I realize it's not me doing anything wrong. It's just this it's the discus community. The discus community is weird. They just have these weird ideas about fish keeping and what it means to keep fish or whatever. I'm not interested in having fish sit in a bare glass box of water with a sponge filter in the middle of it just for the sake of making sure they get as big as they can possibly get. Who would do that? That's weird. Why would you do that? I want to have fish that are just beautiful fish that swim around in my tank and look like tropical fish, just like like all my other fish. I've never had any other fish that I bought for the purposes of just seeing how big I could get it. I buy them so that they can swim around in the fish tank and interact with the plants and other fish, and I don't care if they don't get as big as they can possibly get. So if that's all if that's where we're splitting hairs here, that I'm not doing it right because I'm not trying to max out my fish, then you all need to get over it, because I'm never going to try. That's never been my goal. I've said since day one that I do not intend, in fact, I deliberately intend to make sure they don't get their full size. I want them to stay slightly smaller. I'm hoping 6 to 6.5 inches or something is where they kind of ultimately top out. I'm going to have a lot of fish in this tank. I've already got a lot of plants in there. I got a lot of woodwork. I do not need 10 8-inch fish in this tank swimming around. I also read that when they get stunted and they're slightly smaller, like 6 inches instead of 8, you get clearer markings on them, you get more defined patterning on them, you get brighter, more vibrant colors on them, which I've always found true to be when I used to breed snakes and do reptiles and stuff. The bigger they got, the more that mark. Think about it like when you draw on a balloon and you blow it up. Something similar like that is going on, at least with snakes. I'm not so sure about fish, but my experience with most fish, my larger fish, my angelfish, as they get bigger, their patterns start to spread out and get, less distinct, and their colors tend to get a little duller as they do when they were like smaller and more compact. So if the only downside to me keeping my fish stunted is that they're going to be more colorful and have more crisp, clean lines on them or whatever, that's just a thing I'm going to have to live with, and I'll make do somehow. But having more attractive fish is just one of those things I'm going to have to deal with. So that's the long and short of it. I was completely wrong about them being stunted and their eyes and all that. Again, I was unaware that there was a metric I should have been looking at. I swear to you, I was not simply being obstinate and saying they're not stunted. I didn't know there was something I could measure and determine whether they are or they aren't. As soon as I did, I determined that, yes, based on that metric, they are very much stunted. They have big eyes. The one had 4, and that's probably not the worst one. The smallest one, which is usually down at this end of the tank all by itself, the smallest one probably has an eye that's even bigger than that. And that one, again, concerns me. I've talked about that one. That one to me feels like it's the run. It feels like it's bullied. It's always sort of stayed by itself. It's always stayed down the other end of the tank. And again, those kinds of concerns hold true for any sort of fish. If you had a group of angelfish in the tank and one of them was getting picked on constantly and bullied, that one's probably going to be the run. It's probably not going to develop properly. It's probably going to stay really small. That one may turn out underdeveloped, whereas the other ones may not get to be their full size, but they're going to be fine. They're going to be healthy. They're going to be beautiful fish. They're going to have bright colors and all that. No, they're not going to win any Jack Watley awards for perfect discus, but I don't care. I do not care if I win an award. I'm not going to be entering them in any contest, so they would never have won any awards anyway. So it's just, again, that's not my goal. That's not why I keep fish. I'm not in it for trying to impress other people. I'm not worried about the prestige and all that kind of stuff. I'm not. I'm just keeping these fish because they're beautiful fish and I want them to behave like fish, and I'm just keeping them like fish. I'm doing water changes like a normal person. I'm feeding them like a normal person. I'm keeping tank maintenance like a normal person. I'm not treating them like they're like some special thing. Again, I'm keeping them like they're regular old fish. So if you want to see how that turns out, make sure you're subscribed and make sure you ring that bell and follow me for all my live streams. I do a live stream every Friday night and Sunday night. That's kind of where all this stuff's gotten started. People on my live streams telling me that my discus looks stunted, etc. Again, based on that metric, you all were right. I was wrong. Again, I did not know I was supposed to be looking at that metric, and as soon as I did, I certainly realized that yes, they absolutely do not have 5 or 6, certainly 6, and they don't even have 5 eyes, let alone 6. One of them, maybe one of the better looking ones, maybe this one might have 5 eyes, a full 5 eyes or whatever, but again, it doesn't mean they're not healthy, just nothing to worry about. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling at this point. I was probably rambling 10 minutes ago, but you all get the idea. So thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Don't forget my live streams on Friday night, and I will see you real soon on the next one.